Well, good morning, everyone. I'm John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside. And for this week, course is Lakeside University. And we're fortunate to have Lakesider Jeanette Keaton with us this morning. Jeanette launched her career as a journalist with stints at KTBC TV in Austin and the Dallas Morning News. And Jeanette served as a marketing communications director for eCoetry, which was based in Dallas. She also launched a communications consulting firm from 2004 to 2019 with senior executives at Trinity Industries Incorporated, a Dallas-based Fortune 1000 company. But for today, the session, Fake or Fact, from Disruption to Disinformation. Ever heard someone say, who knows what's true anymore? In today's saturated media environment, when anyone with a smartphone and access to the internet can claim title as a writer, editor, news broadcaster, or journalist, it can be difficult to determine fake from fact, with serious ramifications for democratic forms of government. Jeanette will explain how journalism has evolved over the years, who benefits from the current wellspring of disinformation, the implications for democracy, and what we as a country and individuals can do to fight back. I always do ask you, please mute your cell phone ringers and help me in welcoming Jeanette Keaton.
Thank you, John, for that nice introduction. As John said, my background is as a journalist. Whoops, let's back up. I must have accidentally pushed the button. My background is as a journalist, and a few years ago, I became concerned when I saw very well-educated people, sometimes business associates, sometimes friends, forwarding on information that with a little bit of effort could have been proven demonstrably false. So why was I concerned? Well, because democracy, the foundation of it, is us, we the voters. And it's absolutely imperative for a democratic country to survive that voters are able to determine false information from fact, form opinions based on those facts, and then vote accordingly based upon their own opinions. When we throw up our hands and say, oh, well, it's just too difficult to figure out what's true anymore, we put democracy at risk. And so I started thinking about, well, what could I do about that? And I thought, well, there were media literacy programs being introduced in schools, but there was no really media literacy program for the existing voting public, adults. Actually, there was one. It went through the library, National Library Association, but I'm going, who is going to go to the library and take a course, a media literacy course? However, if your employer said, I want you to take this training, you are going to take this training, you would take the training. And it seemed like a good alignment because critical thinking skills are necessary to determine false information from factual information. And critical thinking skills are one of the top skills that employers are looking for in employees. So I started developing a modular program called Fake or Fact, Real Tools to Determine Real News. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you a condensed version of the first module, which sets the stage for why media literacy is important. But before we get to all that, it's football season. So let's talk a little football. Does anyone here remember the blackout rule promulgated by the FCC several years ago that prohibited NFL games, you're nodding, you remember this, from being aired unless 85% of the stadium was full? Okay, we didn't like that. Yeah, I see hands, I see people nodding, yeah. It wasn't a very popular rule. The FCC decided to do away with it, but first they solicited input from the general public. And they got 21,000 objections from 21,000 fans. I have to get right up here and do this. Fans like Swim Shady, Sonny Hedgehog, Bilbo Baggins, and Luke Skywalker. Yes, Bilbo Baggins and Luke Skywalker were two of the signatures on those 21,000 letters. Actually, they were 21,000 identical letters sent by fake fans. This according to an investigation by the Wall Street Journal. This was a fake grassroots campaign intended to influence the FCC's decision, an early version of what is called computational propaganda, using information and communications technologies to manipulate perceptions and influence behavior. Caveat, the FCC doing away with that rule didn't mean that we can always watch our favorite football team, right? Because the NFL retained the right to block out games if they wanted to. But the point is that someone attempted to influence the FCC's decision using technological tools that allowed it to flood the FCC's website with fake comments from fake fans. Oh, by the way, the NFL has denied being involved with that at all. And I can't find out I haven't seen a follow-up story to say who the perpetrators were, so if anyone has any insight on that, I am all ears if you've read anything about the follow-up to it. Okay, I don't see anybody raising their hand. Well, disinformation has become big business. For-hire companies will create fake social media followers, fake surveys, fake reviews, fake polls, fake IT services, fake scientific journals. Public relations agencies, many in foreign countries, are offering computational propaganda as a service for all sorts of clients, including governments. In fact, countries are now using computational propaganda to suppress fundamental human rights, discredit political opponents, and drown out dissenting opinions. Harvard Business Review calls it truth disrupted. The Rand Corporation calls it truth decay. And the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars calls it the disinformation age. Well, we all know disinformation is nothing new. From a historical perspective, opportunists have always been able to figure out how to use new technologies for less than honorable purposes. But what is different this time is the speed with which disinformation can be distributed and the reach, because it can go worldwide very quickly. And that anyone, anywhere, thanks to the internet, can claim to be a reputable information source. So how has this happened? Let's go back and talk about how we got here. Anybody old enough to remember this? Yeah, the test pattern on your TV that showed up around midnight when all the programming went off, you know. Those were the good old days when there were three primary news sources. They were ABC, NBC, and CBS Evening News, and we all basically worked off of the same set of facts. You know, then came something, that was when I was actually working in the journalism arena. And I worked for LBJ's old station in Austin, KTBC-TV, which was the CBS affiliate. And we would arrive at work in the morning around 9. We'd get our assignments. We'd go out and interview people, shoot video, come back, write our script, work with an editor to put video to them, you know, put it on tape. And at 6 o'clock, we'd be out in the lobby watching the evening news. And at 6:30, we'd head out to dinner. And it was very healthy work. Beginning, middle, end, product every day. It's great work from that standpoint. But then came something that disrupted this journalism model. And what was it? Cable, right? 24-hour cable news, in quotes. And as a result, there were a couple things that were sacrificed. What happened? Can anyone tell me what was sacrificed because of cable news? You're going to have to shout at me. I'm a little bit deaf. Research? Anything else? verification, accuracy. It was all about speed. How quickly can we get this out? You know, so accuracy, you know, kind of fell by the wayside times, or even getting a full idea of what the story actually is or was. And that's why you see this tagline, "This is a developing story," fairly frequently right now. And then there's an even greater disruptor, which everyone is aware of. Right, the internet, yeah. My former editor at the Dallas Morning News, who led the paper to 6 Pulitzer Prizes, went on when he retired to teach journalism at Southern Methodist University, which is my alma mater, and he would tell his journalism students, when you go out on a Saturday night, some restaurant or bar, check out the guy sitting at the end of the bar with his laptop. That guy could be putting out news as he sips his Jack Daniels. That's what the internet has allowed to happen. And now we have another disruptor coming down the pike, which we're already seeing some impacts from, artificial intelligence. And it has accelerated the ability to create fake videos. And it's not always accurate. There is a mayor in Australia that is suing ChatGPT because when you ask what things about him, it comes out that he's a convicted felon. So a new problem here. Today, we live in the age of disruption, an environment marked by rapid advances in technology, creative destruction of business models, geopolitical uncertainty, cyber vulnerabilities, and changing customer expectations often tied to ideology. That's a lot to absorb. That's why I just put it up there on the screen in writing. But that's what we're dealing with. The distribution of information has been democratized. Anyone with a cell phone and a video plan can be an editor, a publisher, a videographer, or a journalist. Fresh new voices are entering the information ecosphere unfiltered, and in many ways that's a good thing. You don't have the guardrail, the protectors, the fences of editors saying, well, I don't know if that's a valid story or not. So it's good that we can have more people out there providing news. But equal access also has its downsides. Evidence and facts are increasingly disregarded or challenged, and opinions proliferate. Anyone can broadcast their own truths and undermine real ones, with real-life ramifications for individuals, for civil society, and for democratic forms of government. In short, the disruptive influence of the internet has opened the floodgates to misinformation and disinformation, and it will get worse before it gets better. I'm sure everyone's heard of fake videos. Technologists and ne'er-do-wells are using software to manipulate video. It merges existing video footage with real-time face tracking. And this, combined with a new audio software, which is in essence Photoshop for audio, makes dubbing difficult to detect, even by digital forensic experts. The result is that you can make anyone say anything. And this kind of shows you how it works.
We present a novel real-time facial reenactment method that works with any commodity webcam. Since our method only uses RGB data for both the source and target actor, we are able to manipulate YouTube videos in real time. Here we demonstrate our method in a live setup. On the right, a source actor is captured with a standard webcam. This input drives the animation of the face in the video shown on the monitor to the left. A significant difference to previous methods is the re-rendering of the mouth interior. To this end, we resynthesize the mouth interior of the target actor using video footage from the training sequence based on temporal and photometric similarity. As we can see, we are able to generate a realistic and convincing reenactment result.
So you could imagine the potential for disinformation associated with this technology. So who's distributing disinformation and why, and what are the ramifications? The reasons behind disinformation are what you might expect: money, influence, and geopolitical goals. But before we talk about the opportunists behind disinformation, let's define a few terms. And we'll start with disinformation and its cousin misinformation, and we'll end up with fake news. I'm curious, how many people use the term fake news? And I'm curious to know how you define that. Is anyone willing to tell me how you define that term? No? Opinion or?
As kind of a joke.
Or kind of a joke, okay. That's fake news. And you would say that when you see something that you might disagree with it. Yes, of course, it's fake because doesn't confirm my existing beliefs, right? Yeah, yeah. Hard to believe? Yeah, when you see it here, you would call it fake news when it's hard to believe. Anybody else? Yeah. Strikingly absurd, okay? Okay, all good definitions. See, you guys came up with some great definitions of what constitutes fake news. It's interesting. The difference between a disinformation and misinformation is a matter of intent, the intent of the person behind it. Disinformation is false information created or shared knowingly with the intent to manipulate or harm. In essence, well, I skipped a slide here. Maybe it's after misinformation. Misinformation is false information shared by mistake. Misinformation can still harm, but that is not the intent. And misinformation can be something like you and me when we share information, like we forward something via email or social media, share it on social media, and later we find out that it's not really true. Or maybe we're talking to our friends here at Lakeside and we tell them something, some juicy little tidbit that we've heard, and then later on we go, well, guess that wasn't right. Oh, we never do that here. We never do that here, right? Misinformation can still harm, but it's really not the intent of it. And this is also the case with news reporters who are striving for best practices in journalism, but who make factual errors or get the story wrong for some reason. They fall under the misinformation category, which you can see here, oops, went too fast, is in this corner of this 4-box, sloppy journalism. And the axes on this are factual accuracy there on the vertical, and impartiality on the bottom. And so maybe in sloppy journals, they were trying to do a good job. They were being impartial, but they got the facts wrong. So it's down in that corner. Gold standard news and analysis is up in this area because it's factually accurate and impartial. Disinformation resides here because the intent is bad, it's not necessarily impartial, there's a purpose behind it, and it's going to include non-factual information. Types of disinformation might include misleading advertising, particularly misleading political advertising, opinion pieces that are not based on factual information, or the letters that were sent to the FCC, or fake news. Now, I know we use the term fake news for a lot of different reasons, but the fact of the matter, folks, is there really is fake news. And it is false, non-factual information made to look like real news with the intent to deceive, and it's a type of disinformation. And some people might call it propaganda. There is a big difference between working journalists who cover real events and real people. Journalists who in many instances put their lives on the line to go out and collect information so they can report it to us sitting safely in front of our TVs or in our easy chair reading our newspaper. There's a big difference between them and opportunists who make up totally false stories that look like news. Like this guy, Justin Kohler, who owned more than 36 fake news websites comprised of totally made-up information. Kohler, a father of two, oversaw his business from the comfort of his suburban Los Angeles home. And here, Kohler is interviewed by a reporter.
So here's National Report. It looks like the website of my former employer, the Huffington Post.
That was intentional.
Like, what was the most controversial, sort of biggest story for you guys?
Yeah, we did a series of stories on Ebola, where several residents of the small town in Texas had contracted Ebola. They probably got about maybe 6 million page views.
6 million. Mm-hmm. That's huge. You must get a kick out of that.
It's very addictive.
So you feel like you're stopped cold turkey, or how are you feeling these days?
Yeah, I do. And again, I'm good with that. I think that it's kind of disappointing that it took President Trump for actual news outlets to kind of focus on this sort of phenomenon.
You say disappointing. Did you vote?
Oh, of course.
And who'd you vote for?
Hillary.
Talk me through this. This is your biggest election clicker. FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. Read that one.
The motive behind the killing is still being investigated, but police say Brown was a highly respected agent with the FBI and very well likely liked in the community.
Is any of that true?
Not a single thing.
Not a single thing.
Totally fiction.
3 days before the election, 500,000 people saw this post. 2 days before the election, over 500,000 people read an article about an FBI agent that killed his wife and himself because of pressure from the Clintons. Like, how much money did this post make you?
Likely somewhere around about $8,000.
$8,000.
Most of that, again, goes kind of to the writer.
So how do they make that money? Anybody know? Yeah, you're showing me pay-per-click. You click on an ad, and they get a bump from it. Did anyone see either of those two stories? Do you remember them by any chance? I have people down here saying yes. Yeah, so they have an impact. They had an impact. This is fake news. Real reporters reporting is not fake news. This pay-per-click model is a real impediment to getting rid of disinformation, because clearly sensationalism sells, especially when the sensational story aligns with what we already believe. So who else is promoting disinformation? Well, foreign countries are. Does anyone remember Jade Helm 15? Jim does. And what was it?
It was a fake story that the government of the United States, military of the United States, was to invade Texas.
Yes. It was stories on social media, right-leaning social media, that said that military exercises in the Southwest were actually a front, and they were going to come into Texas and round up Obama supporters. And people got so concerned about it that Texas Governor Greg Abbott called out the Texas State National Guard to protect the border. Yeah, it was. Yeah. Who do you think it was? Okay. And of course, nothing happened. It was all a hoax. And we later learned from Michael Hayden, who was the former CIA director, in his book, that those rumors were actually initiated by Russian operatives testing out posing as social media accounts on Facebook. And so they actually were thrilled with themselves that they had gotten the governor of a major Texas state, to take action based upon their false information. And it's not just Russia. There are a bunch of other countries that are also putting out false information. China, India, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. Facebook has pulled down hundreds of accounts, it said, originated in Iran. And this is one of them. Take a look at this and then tell me what might make you suspect that it was set up. Yes, you're right. And why does it not go from left to right, but from right to left? Arabic is written right to left. You know, I saw a meme the other day that, you know, had a clown, and they were talking about, oh gosh, it was, had a list of bad things that were going to happen, and they had tax payments as opposed to tax increases. And I'm going, uh-oh, I think this was done by someone from another country because they don't really understand how we refer to increasing taxes. Okay, so influence initiatives also come internally. When the Parkland shooting occurred with all the students, 17 students killed, I mean, there were memes all over the place immediately saying that they were fake, that it was all fake, you know, trying to craft a story around the fact it was just being done to suppress or change gun laws. So, you know, it's going on internally as well. It's not just externally. And US politicians also try and put out disinformation. Or let me say this, try and shape the storyline. President Obama paved the way in 2008 and 2012 using real-time and digital data to profile and target voters with highly tailored messaging. That was kind of the early stages. During the 2016 presidential campaign, improved technology allowed political candidates to put Facebook ads called dark or unpublished posts in front of small groups of people, even individual users, raising concerns that potentially false information could be communicated with no transparency, causing Facebook in 2017 to put an end to dark posts and require the identification of those who purchase digital political advertising. You can find that on Facebook now with every ad. And targeted advertising, as we noted here earlier, tends to be especially effective when the ads align with our existing beliefs, our biases. So let's talk a little bit about bias, and specifically confirmation bias, which all too often gets in the way of determining fake from fact. Take a look at this shot of the front page of the New York Times. And look at some of the headlines. Would you feel differently about the reporting of these stories if you knew they were headlines on the front page of the Fox News website? Because they were. This was a project by a graduate student at MIT. He created this the New York Times fake site as part of a study on confirmation bias. And like the people who he studied, you probably reacted positively to one news source, less so to the other, even though the information provided was exactly the same. Your reaction reflects confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is nothing new. It's very common. It's paying attention to or seeking information that confirms our existing beliefs. It's very natural. Most of us tend to gravitate to people who are like us, who think like us, behave like us, who confirm or agree with our perspectives of the world. We exhibit confirmation bias when we select our friends, our partners, our neighborhoods, our churches, and our news sources. And within the our protective cocoons, confirmation bias is reinforced, forming what are called filter bubbles or echo chambers. And we're easily manipulated within our echo chambers because there, quite frankly, facts tend to be secondary. It's much easier and much more fun to give an opinion, talk about how we feel, especially with others who feel the same way, as opposed to doing the hard work of critical thinking, figuring out the facts. Over time, as our beliefs are confirmed and reconfirmed within our echo chambers, we may come to believe that the way our group thinks is the only way to think. Our own unique reality. But of course, that never occurs here at Lakeside, right? We have no strong opinions about gate fees, property assessments, speeding golf carts driven by children, or sources of long-term funding, right? And when we do talk about those things, we never take anybody's word, right? We always fact check them and try and figure out if what they're saying is actually true. Well, this unique reality situation is not happening here at Lakeside, but there's some horrific examples of violent events that were encouraged by these echo chambers. The man who shot Republican members of Congress during a baseball practice in 2017 was a member of a Facebook group, 2 Facebook groups, called Terminate the Republican Party, and The Road to Hell is Paved with Republicans. On the other side of the fence, both the Australian man who killed 50 at 2 New Zealand mosques and the Allen, Texas man who killed 22 at a Walmart in El Paso were emboldened in social media chat rooms where white supremacists applauded kill scores. So you get the idea. The age of disruption stemming from the internet has radically changed information distribution models. Opportunists have figured out how to leverage our addictions to our devices, social media, and our biases to manipulate us. Bad actors are spreading disinformation to make money, get votes, and take down democracies. And unfortunately, most of us do not have the tools, the critical thinking skills necessary to determine fake from fact. And if we do, who has the time to deploy them? I mean, we're deluged with information all the time. So what are the impacts of this on civil society? First, confusion over basic facts. And this is where we get to the quiz. In 2016, after the presidential election, the polling group Pew Research asked Americans, has fake news caused confusion about surrounding real events? And a majority said at the time that fake news had left them confused about basic facts. You see 64% saying a great deal of confusion and 24% saying some confusion. And it's actually not all that surprising that people have a difficult time figuring out the difference between real and fake, in part because we have something called 24-hour cable news, which really should be called 24-hour cable opinion with a little bit of news smattered in. I think a lot of people confuse opinions and facts. So we'll find out how well you guys did in determining factual statements from opinion statements. You've taken your little test, pull out your papers, and we'll go through this. This is put together, this is what Pew Research asked. I think they took a sample of I don't have the sample size. But it was I think it was around 5,000 people, or maybe, actually it could be a lot more by now because you can still find it on the Pew Research website. So the first one was, immigrants in the US illegally have some rights under the Constitution. Is that a factual statement or an opinion statement? That's right. ISIS lost a significant portion of its territory in Iraq and Syria in 2017. Fact or opinion? Factual. Spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid make up the largest portion of the US federal budget. Oh, that's fact. Yeah, that's why Congress has a really hard time doing stuff. Democracy is the greatest form of government. Yeah, opinion. Increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour is essential for the health of the U.S. economy. Abortion should be legal in most cases. That's probably the most obvious one. That should be immigrants who are in the U.S. illegally are a very big problem for the country. Opinion. Government is almost always wasteful and inefficient. That's correct. And healthcare costs per person in the U.S. are the highest in the developed world. It's fact. President Barack Obama was born in the United States. Okay, so how did we do? Anybody get 10 out of 10? Yay! 9 out of 10? All right, we got a really smart group here, obviously. So, the second implication of the age of disinformation is lack of trust in mainstream institutions, specifically government, media, and business. And you know, distrust and disinformation are kind of mutually reinforcing vicious cycle. If you don't know who to trust, what facts should you believe? And if you don't know which facts are accurate, how do you know who to trust? Our distrust of mainstream institutions has a disturbing impacts for democracy. The vulnerability of public discourse to manipulation. An inability to implement fact and evidence-driven public policies. Can you think of examples of these two? Anybody? That's do number one, vulnerability of public discourse to manipulation. Oh, yeah. But can you think of anything concrete? Okay, we'll move on. An inability to implement fact and evidence-driven public policies, challenges in actual emergencies and crisis management. We saw a lot of that during COVID. Neutralizing the news media as a force for government accountability. That's definitely happening. Possible government overreach. We've seen some of that. Reality apathy, and that's where people just say, I don't know what's true anymore. I can't figure it out. And that's actually the goal of autocratic countries. They don't want people to be able to know what's true. In fact, the first thing autocratic people do usually is discredit the news media or take it over. And the undermining of democracy and democratic institutions. Former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson captured the implications for democracy in his commencement speech to the Virginia Military Institute a few years ago.
If our leaders seek to conceal the truth, or we as people become accepting of alternative realities that are no longer grounded in facts, then we as American citizens are on a pathway to relinquishing our freedom. This is the life of non-democratic societies, comprised of people who are not free to seek the truth. We know them well. Societies in Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. You can complete the list. A responsibility of every American citizen to each other is to preserve and protect our freedom by recognizing what truth is and is not, what a fact is and is not, and begin by holding ourselves accountable to truthfulness and demand our pursuit of America's future be fact-based.
So what can be done? How can we inoculate ourselves against false information and restore trust, mitigate risk, reduce the social and political polarization that is encouraging the spread of disinformation? There are any number of possible actions, including intervention and regulation by government, self-regulation on the part of social media, search engines, and YouTube, greater transparency on the part of the news media, technology applications that identify false information, and development of relevant case law. And clearly, there's got to be a comprehensive solution involving all of these different venues. And there'll be a number of challenges to overcome, including time to impact and unintended consequences and potentially infringements on the First Amendment. And we're already seeing concerns about censorship as social media close accounts and technology applications are developed that subjectively identify information as false. But what can we do? We as individuals, what's our role? Well, ideally, we shouldn't have to rely on the government or social media or technology. We should have the tools to be able to determine factual information ourselves. But even if we did, it's so time-consuming to fact-check everything, and we're deluged by information. But there are two simple things that we can do. The first one is get out of our echo chambers. And that means seeking out different sources of news that may have different biases than our own. And one of the ways to do this, I have Apple News, and I select news sources to come up on my Apple News screen that represent the right and the left and the middle. And so it's interesting sometimes reading the same story in different publications and seeing how they're covered, and you usually learn something from that. Well, how do you figure out if a particular news source is left or right? Well, there's some different tools that you can use to do that. And here's one of them, All Sides Media Bias Chart, and it's at allsides.com. And some of you may have heard the CEO of All Sides speak last summer. He came to Lakeside and did one of the presentations in Hoover Auditorium. And they have a media bias chart. It's not as comprehensive as some media bias charts. There are actually these other sources as well. But you can look at this and say, okay, so here's far right, here's center, here's left, here's far left. And pick some of them. And then start getting your news from different sides of the spectrum. Definitely worthwhile to do. Some of these now, they all started out as free. Some of them now have fees associated with it. The Alfonte's media bias chart does. It's very comprehensive. And all of these have different ways that they approach rating bias, but this can be helpful in picking your sources. The second thing is kind of the overriding tenet of the Fake or Fact program, which is no research, no sharing. If you're not willing to do a little bit of due diligence to figure out if something's factual, then just don't forward it on. Don't talk about it. Fact check it first. If it sounds too outrageous to be true, it probably is. So no research, no sharing. And at Lakeside, we should in particular be all over this concept because we are a community that prides ourselves in espousing Christian values. And if you look at the 9th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. And if you're untruthful, if you're spreading false information, I know, not a good thing if we're doing it. Because I'm guilty too. So from disruption to disinformation. Well, we've let the genie out of the bottle, and it's not going back in. We're in a brave new digital world where fiction is easily promoted as fact, where the truth is elusive, where democracy is at risk. And to survive and thrive, we must all do our part as individuals, as communities, and as a country. We must be more aware, sharper, and smarter than ever before. Critical thinkers. Thank you very much for your attention. And does anybody have any questions or want to talk about anything? Or yes, ma'am.
If you hang on 1 second, I'll be there with the mic.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, how are you? I used to live in Dallas, and I get the Dallas Morning News still. If I read the Dallas Morning News, am I getting all the information?
They still can't hear.
Hi. I used to live in Dallas, and I still get the Dallas Morning News. And if I read that, am I getting a good source of news? Your former employer.
Well, I will tell you that local newspapers, and that's what it's become. It used to be a national newspaper, but newspapers are struggling, and their staffs have been cut significantly. You know, when I worked there, when I would write a story, it would go through at least 3 editors before seeing the light of day. And now, according to one of my college friends who was the real estate editor there his entire career and retired in the spring, he'll write something and it goes straight on the website. And they've stripped, you know, they're hanging on by their fingernails. I think the people there who are working, they're going to be qualified journalists who've been trained in journalism best practices. You know, so I think they're doing the best that they can possibly do. We've seen a real decline in local newspapers. In fact, there was a study by NewsGuard that showed there are now more fake local newspaper sites that are put out by different political arms than there are real, independent local newspapers. So that's the best answer I can give you. It's difficult right now because of all the competition. Anybody else? Hello, Elizabeth.
Okay, hang on. We'll be right back to you.
Thank you. So on your quiz, I missed one question. It was the second one. And there's a word in there that threw me off. It says ISIS lost a significant portion of its territory. Well, I think to say significant is an opinion. It would be factual if it said ISIS lost 37% of their territory.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think we need to tell Pew Research they need to improve the specificity. Right. It's a matter of relativity.
Right.
Your perception.
So I got 100%.
That was the purpose of the question, to be
My wife introduced me to Snopes, I think it was called. Pretty good site for dispelling urban legends and things. Are you familiar with that? Do you think it's accurate? And are there other services like that?
Yeah. In fact, when I talk about technology tools, in the Fake or Fact Real Tools to Determine Real News, there are 3 types of tools. There are journalism best practices, there are fact-checking tools, and then there are technological tools. And that is a technological tool, something you can find online that can help you determine fake from fact. There are a number of fact-checking websites. And a really good one is factcheck.org. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the third one. Snopes, factcheck.org. Oh, PolitiFact. PolitiFact is another one. And it's really interesting, once again, instead of just taking the word of one fact checker, go out and ask the same question on 3 different sites and see how they compare. Again, just don't assume that what you're reading is necessarily accurate. It's the whole echo chamber. Oh, well, yes, it agrees with my opinion, Snopes, so okay, it must be right. It's interesting to compare. Yes, sir. I need a microphone down here.
Thank you. Thank you for asking the question about number 2, because that's the same way I saw it too. But I also struggled on number 3, where it said that spending on Social Security, Medicare, and such make up the largest portion of the federal budget. But they also are one of the heaviest taxes that we pay for Social Security. I mean, we pay into Social Security almost our entire life if we're employed. So I stumbled on that one also in terms of there's not enough context in that question to make me feel strongly about it.
Yeah, and again, these were written by Pew Research. they put it together, and I'm assuming that they're smarter at putting it together than I am, but I understand that there's some. Oh, these are overachievers right here. They've got to be
Not
100 or they're
competitive
not
at all.
happy, obviously. So. Yes.
In my mind, I'm thinking that a lot of the information that is in this program is from 2018 and before. And I'm thinking that if it were updated, it would be multiplied. That's my feeling on it. Just
What would be
from
multiplied?
the amount of disinformation and lack of fact checking.
Yeah. And the reason that it's 2018 or before is I ended up filling in for during Journalism and Media Literacy Week for a presenter who developed COVID and couldn't do her presentations. And so I was asked to, I said, well, I have this presentation that's geared toward business. I don't think I can pull it together. But I ended up working for about 48 hours and doing it during Media Literacy Week. And then after putting all that work into it, I thought, golly, I'd like to do it again if I can before I forget it all again. And told John, if you need somebody for Lakeside University, I'd be happy to do it. And I thought about going back and really intended to go back and try and update some of it, but went on vacation instead, so. But I think you're right. I mean, it's exponentially. I mean, we've just gone down the slippery slope with disinformation. It's really hard. Anybody else? Nope. I got one back here.
Can you come up with an example of this kind of a circumstance from decades back that would indicate that in the future it will be better because of human nature? Or when you said we're on a slippery slope?
Well, if you look back to the Gilded Age, that was the period of yellow journalism, and you had the New York newspaper wars and the Pulitzers versus, and now I'm forgetting the name of the other paper, but Hearst versus Pulitzer, and one of them, I think it's Pulitzer, correct me, Dave, if I'm wrong, is actually credited with starting the Spanish-American War with disinformation. So yeah, it was pretty. Yeah, to sell papers. So then it went through a period of improvement, and really kind of the golden age of journalism was during Watergate. And there was a high level of trust in the news media at that point in time. But when I first heard the term fake news, I went, oh my gosh, this is the beginning of the end, because again, this is what autocracies do. As flawed as the news media is, and I'm certainly flawed and my peers are flawed, it is an essential function. It's the fourth estate to keep track of the government. And the real sad thing is with local newspapers, there is not that watchdog in a lot of places. And you're going to have, people saying, ooh, wow, well, now I can get away with a lot of stuff, or there's an opportunity to. I think I'll get myself elected. The news media is the watchdog of government. Yes, sir. Well, we need a microphone over here. So, I mean, fake news is just, that whole concept just sent me into a spiral, because I thought we're in trouble.
I think it's interesting that the high level of information being reported around Watergate time was also at the highest level, according to Robert Putnam, who spoke here a couple of years ago, of civic joining, civic activity, which he's calling for to happen again in this country. So yes, it can happen because it happened after the Gilded Age, and it peaked in the 1960s, and it's been declining up until now, that he declares it the worst polarization since the Civil War.
Yeah, Jim, thanks for reminding me about that, because if you heard Robert Putnam speak, his concept was that he actually did studies in Italy, that you would think that like education would have something to do with civic involvement or whatever, but it turns out that with polarization, but it turns out that civic involvement was the key. The more people are engaged with their communities, the less polarization there is, because you're meeting people face to face. And you think about it, now we've got the internet and we don't have to meet people face to face. You know, we can live our entire lives and find out very interesting things if we want, just by going on the internet, you know. So his concept was join or die, get engaged, and if we do that, we can create an upswing and reduce some of this polarization. Because we're all human. We all have basically the same desires and needs.
I really like your presentation this morning. My background, and it's probably some of you in here, is your background is the same, is in the medical field. I was in dentistry, but then I taught dental students and dental assisting students. And what do we teach? Facts. Why? Because we're expected to share factual information with our patients so they can make decisions about how they want their health care issues managed. And so I kick it back to my students and say, you now are learning a process for coming up with factual information. Now turn to the rest of your life and do the same thing. And that's what you're talking about, is looking at where are we getting our facts, not opinions. We need our opinions to be based on facts and not falsehoods. So I think you're calling us to look at sources as a doctor or dentist would, in order to communicate with their patients, that we do the same thing with this other information so we can communicate with each other in more factual terms and less opinions.
So how would you define facts as a teacher?
Okay.
How do you know what a fact is?
I'll put it this way in terms of dental journals, because we get all this research that are done about different techniques, etc. And when you get a journal, what do you have at the end of the article? You have 2 pages of footnotes. And you start looking at those footnotes, and you know which ones are that you can depend on, and which ones are like they did their research on 15 people as opposed to 15,000. So you learn these things that draw you to saying that, and it's also because the facts have been agreed upon by multiple other sources. So you say, okay, that's factual.
So you're using critical thinking skills.
Yes.
Yes, to determine what the facts are that you're going to relay.
And so when you live a life of doing that for other people, because medicine is to save people's lives, not kill them. So I go back to that's what we all want to do for each other, is that we share as much factual information as we can so we can make decisions about ourselves and our country.
Good points, excellent points. And I will say this, when I'm in the Baker Fact Tools program, we talk about, well, what is a fact? And frequently it's something that can be observed or repeated, but also we talk about primary sources. You're reading a news article and it's talking about a document. Well, don't read, go to the document. And it's pretty easy nowadays to click through things or to Google it and find the document and read it. And when you actually go to the source information, then you'll find out that lots of times the reporting on it is skewed. It's cherry-picked, which is another item on that 4 box that we talk about, is cherry-picking information, which is actually picking out the facts that support your argument or your viewpoint and presenting that in a story form or analysis in order to make a point. So you look for primary sources. Other primary sources are an eyewitness or a legal document or a scientific study, although there you have to be careful on that now too, because There are pay-to-play scientific journals now, which you're probably aware of, and because of the pressure on professors to publish or die. So you have to be a little bit careful. But anyway, we talk about primary sources, and that's what you want to be looking for. And when you can, if you're reading a story online, try and figure out what the primary source is and go to that. Don't take necessarily the reporter's interpretation. There was a question up here that we didn't. Yes, Dave, hey.
Jeanette, thanks for a wonderful presentation that's very relevant, obviously. It's been relevant for a very, very long time, since the beginning of newspapers, most likely, if not before. My question, though, goes much more toward, I'm going to say, broadcast journalism. It seems to me that a primary objective of broadcast journalism is to create audience, make money, and one of the tools to do that is to create conflict, even where there isn't a lot of conflict. Do you have comments about that?
Yeah, I don't watch 24-hour opinion. Now I think well, I think your local 6 o'clock news is I think they're probably a little more on point because they're covering local news and they only have 20 minutes really to do it, so they can't spend a lot of time on fluff. CBS, NBC, ABC, I really don't even watch them either. I read all the time. But in the big picture standpoint, yeah, all news media is trying to make money to survive. You have to pay your reporters. You have to, if you're a real news reporting group and you're sending people over to the Middle East to cover the conflict over there, that's very expensive. Why is it 24-hour cable opinion? Because it's much cheaper just to bring people in and give their opinion as opposed to paying reporters to go out in the field and actually cover real stuff. And a lot of those people have books they're trying to sell when they get on there and talk. I mean, it can be helpful at times helping you analyze things, but boy, I wouldn't rely on it very heavily. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, newspapers try and make money too. I mean, and right now, it's a difficult time period. But there is if you're not familiar with it, ProPublica is a not-for-profit which it's a consortium that draws on a lot of different reporters. They have paid reporters too. They do a lot of really good investigative work. ProPublica, ProPublica.com, ProPublica.com. All Sides also has a feature to their website where they will take a news story of the day and they will link you to a source on the right, one on the center, and one on the left. And then you can easily just compare the reporting right there. You don't have to do it separately yourself. Allsides.com. That was the media bias chart I put up there, is allsides.com. Yes?
Thank you for this. It stimulates critical thinking, that's for sure. We need to clone you about 10 million times and send you out en masse to the populace. And I truly mean that too. I think we are under-equipped to really go out and send this message out there. I think back to when I was growing up, my formative years, which would have been the 60s, and we had for me, I lived in the country, so we had the TV went off at about 11 o'clock. You had two different choices of channels that you could get information from. There was one newspaper. There was no local newspaper, really. So your choices were very limited. Today, we're just completely inundated with options. There are so many of them, it's very difficult to figure out where to go to get really good, reliable information. And unless we can somehow figure out how to get over that hump, I'm very pessimistic about our future. That's why I say we need 1 million of you out there telling this message.
Well, if anyone pays my expenses, I'll go give the presentation anywhere for free.
Back to the mic.
Well, I don't want to be out of pocket, but I mean, you don't have to. Now, Jim's going, what? What? Charge.
Dave, getting back to your question about sensationalism, and getting back to yours, which is get to the source. A little event occurred January 6, 2021, and we had some family in town told that January 6th was just people visiting the Capitol. Anybody hear that? And when we asked what their source was, it was a secondary source that had a political agenda. And they didn't push any further on that. We watched it on television. It was broadcast nationally and internationally. But we've gotten lazy and we've gotten into confirmation bias. We want to believe what we want to believe. And as citizens, we've got to change that mindset and pierce through the disinformation that is coming at us all the time from geopolitical entities and our own Congress.
Yeah, that would be a primary source. You know, you watched it developing live. I mean, I saw them whisk out of the Capitol. I saw the gallows. You know, I saw them beating the police officers with flagpoles. I was crying. So awful. Anybody else have a question?
Don't mean to hijack your.
Oh.
Another book I would recommend is Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. It was written in the 80s, and it talks about, it was recommended to me by Pulitzer Prize winner out of Nashville. Help.
Doesn't matter.
Wrote on the president's. Anyway, it's a good source of how we got to where we are of amusing ourselves versus fact. It started sort of with Sesame Street and them being fast and colorful and allowing kids having to be entertained versus educated.
What's the name of the book?
Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Ourselves to death. Amusing Ourselves to Death. Yes. Neil Postman. Anyone else? Oh, one more.
It seems like that news now has become entertainment. I think Fox News, when they were sued, they said they were entertainment network, not a news network. And I think that's what they want to do, entertain, no matter if it's true or not.
Yep.
Another book that had a big impact on me way back in the 60s, I believe it was Future Shock. And I've revisited that book recently because I've just kept hearing echoes as I was looking at all these events that are taking place to see if, in fact, his predictions were accurate. I would recommend you take a look at that one, too.
I listen to a lot of Christian stations and get their news. Recently, they just go back to January 6th. A young man, a wonderful Christian young man, just got out of jail for being put in, wrongly accused being there. To hear his side of the story is totally different than what was just shared earlier. But my concern is, like what the dentist says, the doctor, with COVID, vaccines versus good or bad and that, I want to know the truth and the facts for my own well-being and my health, and that's where my concern is. There's so much discussion of both sides. And, you know, again, are my resources as good as others? But I think there's some great Christian news stations that are out there as well that I didn't see up on that list.
You know, when I think about the whole COVID furor and everything, it was like throughout the entire time, this is a developing story. You know, it was a new virus, and they didn't know what to do with it. You know, and people were dying right and left. And so the leaders were trying, you know, our medical leaders were trying to protect us as much as possible. And then as time evolved, they realized, oh, well, you know, it's not, you can't touch something here necessarily and get it. You're gonna, you know, it was a learning process, I guess, is the point. And that's kind of what journalism is now, too. It's a learning process and trying to figure out, well, what really is the story? Something happened, but is that really the story? Or did it happen for a reason? And what is that reason? And is that really the story? And then who's behind that? You know, so it's kind of like it's a process. It's not cut and dried. And, you know, I feel for the people who are in charge trying to figure out the best thing to do to keep it from spreading and stop people from dying. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, or I guess. So you're saying go to the source, right?
The primary source.
The
yeah.
primary source. So when
Not
you're
always
watching the news and they're talking about Project 2025, you can go and read the actual Project 2025.
Right.
That's not the problem. The problem is that Trump's plan? The problem isn't finding the source, the primary source. That's easy. The problem is, how do you get to the primary source in his mind? You have to listen to what he says, and then you have to use your own intuition, I guess, to decipher for yourself, is he telling the truth or is he not? Right, but it's still your intuition. I mean, there's no way to get in. Yes, yes, not intuition. You're right, critical thinking. Yeah, that's it.
And mine was John Meacham. He said if any Pulitzer Prize winner, presidential biographer, he said if any could have all Americans read just one book, it would be this, Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman.
Anybody else?
Thank you very much.
Hey, you've been a
Jeanette.
great
Thank you.
audience today. Thank you.